Welcome to the very first seminar at BP 2015. We may have a few more people joining us, I'm sure, as they find their way around this exciting new venue. The first seminar is titled Understanding the Market Potatoes Operate In. We have two speakers today. Firstly will be Chris Cowan, who's the Consumer Insight Director at Kantar International UK. He specialises in fresh produce and has specific expertise in potatoes, so I think you'll find his talk very, very interesting. And secondly, Arthur Marshall, who is actually standing in for Rebecca Hughes, who unfortunately had to step out of the role a few days, so very big thank you to Arthur for stepping in. Arthur works in the Market Intelligence team at AHDB Potatoes. AHDB, and he works across potatoes and cereals. He writes many of the publications and provides a lot of the levy payer data and analysis to help you all make better business decisions. Their presentations will include a wealth of information which will really show how by understanding the market that potatoes operate in, you can identify opportunities to make fairly small changes which can have a big impact on the market. So with no further ado, I'm going to ask Chris to step up to the podium and present his presentation.
Good morning. My name's Chris Cowan. As introduced, I'm here from Kantar World Panel, and I'm going to talk about three main things today. The first is the notion that within produce we're all in this together. Secondly, that history isn't always an indicator of destiny. And then thirdly, reasons to be optimistic, particularly within the potato industry. In terms of who Kantar World Panel are, we've got a household panel of 30,000 households, and this is demographically and regionally representative of the GB population. In essence, it's a mini sample, but it's the biggest mini sample there is out there. And what we do is, with our 30,000, we get them to record every purchase they make that they bring back into the home. So if you do your main shop in a Tesco, and then a top-up shop during the week in a Sainsbury's local, and then a Friday night you treat yourself to something from M&S, we're capturing all these different purchases. So we're getting a wealth of information from this 30,000. We also collect their till receipts. Now, this is really important when looking at produce because obviously we get lots of pricing information. But if we look just at the bottom, what you get is also things like the total amount spent. So that's really important if you think about the nature of the shopping trip. Is it that main shop people are doing, or actually is it more of a top-up or replenishment trip? In terms of who we work with, so I work within the produce team, and we have about 65 different clients across the produce spectrum. And what this means is we're working with whole head and prepared clients. We're working with people both on the fruit and the veg side. So we're really getting a lot of voices telling us what's going on in the industry and what changes are happening. So coming on to my presentation. So on this notion of that we're all in this together, well, what do I mean? If we look at just how GDP's been for the last few years, it's no surprising we had a recession. But certainly the message has been that actually growth is returning, and in the last couple of years we have seen some GDP growth. And certainly the message to the man on the street is that actually things are really positive. There's a lot of growth and there's reasons to be optimistic. But the retailers, they've been sort of continuing this notion that we're still under pressure, our budgets are under pressure. So what they've been doing is really pushing a price message. So lots of different price activities and initiatives to really try and win our spend and drive our loyalty, particularly within the big four retailers. And when we think, well, what impacts this had on grocery? So there are two lines here. The first is the grey line, and that's grocery deflation, or inflation and then deflation. And the second line is groceries performance. What we can see is actually deflation's been having quite a negative impact on the total grocery performance. The bit that we think about is actually if you had £100 extra, are you going to rush out and spend it on groceries? No, you treat yourself with more exciting things, going out for dinner, trips to the cinema, maybe even putting it towards holidays. But with this changing retail landscape, has it actually affected our shopping behaviours? So because we've got this massive panel, what we can do is sort of dispel some of the myths that you might hear in the media. And the first is that we're shopping a lot more frequently. If we just look at how often the average household shopping in 2010 versus now, it hasn't changed. Now, certainly within pockets of London, we might have increased our shopping a bit more. But overall, it's one of these myths that we hear about. The next is about the death of the weekly shop. So 5 years ago, we were doing a main shop every 13 or so days. That, again, hasn't changed. And similarly, we're doing a lot more top-up and convenience trips. Unsurprisingly, no. So it's about thinking about, it's not just listening to what people say they're doing, but it's actually looking at what they're doing. Now, on this notion of all being in this together, we know it's been a tough time for the major multiples. They've all lost market share. We're seeing lots of sort of struggles within their financial accounts that are reported. But we know there's also been growth opportunities, so the discounters have really seized the opportunity, particularly during a tough economic climate within grocery. But also, we've seen growth from Waitrose, so very much a premium offering at quite a struggling time. So actually, it does show that, yes, the headline might not be great, but we can definitely get some growth back into grocery. But is price becoming something that actually shouldn't or isn't the key battleground for many people? So because we've got this panel, and because they're continuous, we can ask them questions and then track their responses over time. So if we just think about 3 key indicators of how conscious they are about budget, and we think about the first one, so I work to a strict budget when buying groceries, we can see that's been a downward trend for the last 5 years. Similarly, if you look at comparing prices, another similar trend. And then thirdly, consider that price is the most important thing. Yes, that's important for 27% of us, but that means that 73% of us, it's not the most important thing. So why are we hammering on about price? Now, if we just think about the produce market, it's about £11 billion, and it splits into 3 key areas. So we've got whole head vegetables, which of course potatoes sits in, whole head fruit, and then prepared, so potatoes will play a part there. And if we just think about their sizes, so fruit and veg are both at about £5 billion. The prepared market, slightly behind at 1.2 million. But if we look at actually their sales performance in the last year, what we can see is that it's a good place if you're in fruit and prepared, but difficult if you're in veg. If we then think about how much volume actually is sold within the UK, we can see veg is really important. It's the sort of single biggest part of the volume game. But encouragingly, we are seeing volume growth across fruit, veg, and prepared. So shoppers are buying a bit more. But the thing that's really concerning is the average price change. So if we just look at the top line level, how much prices have changed, we know that prices in veg are down 6%, largely driven by some of the activity within the potato market, but also if we think about other categories like brassicas, which have seen real price focus from the retailers. But the reason that we should still be really encouraged is how often shoppers are still engaging with these categories. So the final number here is how often the average household will buy each of these categories in a year. So you've got lots of opportunities to win back these shoppers' loyalties, and they're still really engaged with your categories. The effect of price has been it's wiped out about £250 million of the produce market in the last year. So that's an almighty number. And this is the one where when we talk to the retailers, actually, these are the sort of big numbers they're trying to chase back. Because if we're cutting prices, it's something that's really important that we need to try and win back through sort of growing extra volume sales, which is going to offset this. And we haven't been in produce. And when we think about, how drastic is that impact of changing price? So what we can see is, how are panellists reacting to what they're doing when they're buying? And we can see, are shoppers buying any more frequently? So that's this little light blue bar. But then we look at the contribution of smaller trips, so people buying slightly less. But the thing that really drives the produce market and just how drastic it is, that's the impact of price when you think about slightly more frequent shopping, slightly smaller baskets. And then finally, you get some population growth. So price is really the thing that will swing the produce market from growth into decline and back again. But, as mentioned, the theme of the first section is that we're not all in this together. So if we just think about some of the major whole head categories, what we can see is, firstly, the average price year on year, whether it's gone up or down. Unfortunately, potatoes down at the bottom has seen some price deflation. But the encouraging thing is when you then look at, has it stimulated volume growth? In most categories, yes. So bananas stand out here as one of the big losers. So one of the biggest categories within grocery, bananas, but people simply not buying it as much. So it's the same price in every retailer as well. So loose bananas at 68p. It's very hard to drive some extra sales. And it's almost that unconscious decision of shoppers to not buy anymore. So then when we think, what impact is this having on the retailers? What we can see that is if we just plot here how the different retailers have been performing over the last couple of years, the things that will really stand out is actually this grey line at the top, which is Aldi, followed by Lidl, and then the sort of wealth of retailers that are down here. And this is in cash sales, so their growth. Now, one of the people, I'm not sure if he's in the room, but he certainly commented during one of my presentations. For him, this is one of the big parts because actually you can't bank volume. It's about your cash sales, and that's what you need to be chasing. But actually, if you're not in Aldi or Lidl, it's been quite a tough time over the last 5 years. But when we flip it on its head and we think about, well, is it stimulating some volume growth? Are we selling more stuff at least? Well, yes, we are. So I'm just going to plot those same retailers, but this time looking at their volume growth. And particularly, if we look at people like Sainsbury's and Morrison's, we can see some growth coming back in. But again, it's about Aldi and Lidl. That's where the growth has been in terms of selling more volume. So yes, retailers are seeing some volume growth stimulated. But what impacts is having on their retailer shares? So retailer shares is something that's imperative to retail buyers, looking at how they're performing versus whether they're winning share, whether they're losing share. If we just plot some of these retailer shares over time, the thing that's really interesting is it's quite a difficult place for most retailers. What we can see, actually, if we look at Tesco as one example, they've lost 4.5 percentage points over 5 years in the produce market. Sainsbury's following a similar trend. The standout performer has been Aldi, so they've tripled their market share in 5 years, and this is within cash sales, so it's not just volume. And that's then what leads us on to thinking about, well, it's really important then to understand what's going on in different channels within grocery. So there are 4 major channels because these have a massive impact on the market dynamics. And the first is if we think about the big 4 main estates, so these are their big supermarkets that they operate, they command about 56% share of the market, and this is just within produce. Discounters now pushing 13%. High street convenience, this is people like the Co-op and then any of the major retailers' convenience fascias. They're at 9.5%. And then finally online. So we hear a lot of buzz about online. So it's the smallest channel at 6%. But then we look at, well, how have these grown in the last year? And it's quite clear to see where the growth's coming from. If you're in bed with the discounters, you're doing very well. Similarly, there's a lot of opportunity if you supply to one of the major malts who has an online offering because there's still a lot of growth to chase there. And if we think about, well, why is online doing so well? Well, the first thing is we're really successful at getting more people online. So this is just the growth of the number of households that buy produce online in an average year. And then secondly, we're doing it more often. So we're getting more shoppers and we're buying produce online more often. So we've added about 1.6 million extra households, the GB population, onto online. And we've also encouraged them to do it 4.5 times more. So that's quite a positive to take away. And the thing that's really interesting about online is the type of shopper it appeals to. So what we know is there's a direct correlation between the amount you earn and the amount of your grocery expenditure that goes on online shopping. So when we think about produce versus other markets like baked beans and Coca-Cola, if we're buying a big grocery shop, we can stock up on ambient products. But it's not the same with produce. It has the shorter shelf life. So the thing that's really interesting is, well, which products do well online? And that's the premium end of the market. So things like avocados, squashes, and kale do really well online, where actually things like berries, where people still want to pick them out, still struggle. But then it comes to the discounters. So obviously talking about the ongoing success that Aldi have had. And Aldi overtook Waitrose as the 6th largest retailer in the UK earlier in the year. And this led to The Guardian making a quip about actually we need to save this great British institution that is Waitrose. But what is it that's driving Aldi's strong performance? Well, if we think about just how much we spend on an average trip within the big 4, and this is just the main estate, so removes the impact of their convenience offering, what we see is it's remained at about just over £4 for the last 5 years. If we look at what's happened at Aldi, and we're bearing in mind they're cheaper on almost every line than one of the big 4 main estates, we're now spending almost as much as we are in an Aldi than we are in the big 4 main estate. And why is that? Well, the second challenge that we get from clients is, well, surely they have a smaller range, so this would disencourage people from shopping around. Well, it's sort of quite the opposite. So what I've looked at is all the baskets that happen within produce, and I've looked at, well, when someone's shopping in the big 4 main estate, how many different items of produce, so apples, potatoes, bananas, how many baskets have at least 6 different types of produce item? And what we can see is in the big 4 main estate, it's about 22.5% of baskets have 6 or more items. So quite a sort of engaged shop across the produce market. If you look at what's happening in Aldi, though, just because they've got a limited range doesn't stop you from shopping around. In fact, if anything, they're making the offering simpler and easier to shop, and that's where they're winning lots of spend from. So this notion, bringing it back to that we're all in this together, yes, the produce market is struggling, and it has been for a couple of years, but it doesn't mean there aren't growth potentials. And that's where it comes on to history not being destiny. So this is my local football team, Brentford, who I've been sort of an avid fan for a number of years. Their history is they push for promotion, then get immediately relegated. Now, the bit there is, thankfully, when they got promoted a couple of seasons ago, actually, they pushed on, had quite a strong season last year, and they're looking for sort of mid-table security this year. So actually, you can't, just by looking at past performance, it's not always a brilliant indicator of what's going to happen. And this can be applied to the produce market. So being a bit of a data geek, that's why I work for a data agency, you can break down the produce market into sort of broadly 108 subcategories. So that's what I've done. And I thought, right, over 4 years, so from 2011 to the end of 2014, how many of these categories have grown their volume? It's 65 of them. And then I thought, okay, well, how many of these maybe just grew in line with population growth? So that was a sort of further 7. Actually, there are 36 markets where at the end of 2014 they were selling less volume, so despite population growth, selling less volume than they were 4 years ago. And the concerning thing is when we look at these markets, so we've got plums, we've got pears, we've got parsnips, apples and potatoes. These are very much what we'd call traditional British markets, so ones that have typically an older shopper base, ones that we're thinking, well, actually, they represent an awful lot of both cash and volume to the produce industry. But, so being also a historian, so that was my degree, it was thinking about, well, do I just come here and talk about how sort of doom and gloom there is? And this was one of the quotes that we used to get sort of trotted out to us at lectures. And it's the bit of, it's basically encouraging you not to be a lazy historian. Don't just repeat what everyone else has said. So just because things have been tough doesn't mean they're always going to be tough. So thinking about that, those 36 markets, so that includes the apples, pears and plums, and it was thinking, right, so they've all had a tough 4 years. How many of them have actually turned around their performance in the last year? Quite a few of them. So the bit here that we're looking at is actually, so 23 of these markets have grown their volume in the last year. And the one I'm just going to show you a quick case study of is the apple market. So apples have been struggling. And if we look at what apple volume's been doing for the last few years, it's been quite a tough place. This is to the end of 2014. And we think, well, if we just look at some of the top-line data, it's very easy to say, well, of course, they've just stuck them on promotion, they're selling more stuff, this is quite a short-term solution. I think perhaps that's played an impact, because then if we look at what have their volume sales done in the last year, volume has grown. But they've actually gone beyond this. So if we think about one of them, and this is the Pink Lady element of it, what they've come back with is a really targeted approach to how they're going to turn around their volume performance. So if we think about the Pink Lady offering and what it's been for the last couple of years, what they've got here, this is just a grab of one of their online adverts. They've clearly defined who their target audience is. It's the younger women. They've also targeted the needs that they want. So actually it's about a health need and saving calories, but also it's about occasions. So things like snacking. So they've targeted that really well, and that's been across lots of their media that they've done. And what's been the impact? Well, if you look at where cash growth is coming from in the apple market now, it's these younger households. It's worked so successfully by successfully targeting and getting that message out, rather than just a blanket buy more apples. But similarly, if we look at who's driving those extra consumption occasions, so as well as tracking our panelists purchasing, we're also tracking how and when they use products. That's been this young female group, so exactly who they've been targeting. And there are lots of parallels between the apple market and the potato market. So it can be done to turn around volume performance. And if we think about, well, what's going forward then? What's the thing that perhaps we can see in the apple market going forward? The thing that's really interesting is go on the Pink Lady website now. What you'll see is clearly what they're targeting, and that's where we're seeing growth come from. Not only targeting kids, because apples can play a great role that sort of sugar-based candies and sweets can't, but also it's further this sort of snacking occasion, something that apples plays really well in. So bringing it back to the potato market then, well, what are the reasons to be optimistic? So in essence, it's a massive category. When we think about what percentage of us buy it in the year, it's 96% of us, so almost every single person buys at least one potato product in a year. Secondly, we do it really often. We're buying it fortnightly on average, so we've got mass penetration engagement, we've got really regular interaction with the category, and it's worth an awful lot, so just over £1 billion. So this is the sort of the single largest category, followed by berries and currants. But we think it's not just about buying potatoes, it's about, well, how often are we eating them? And what we know is, say, 2/3 of us will eat potatoes in an average week, and we'll do so about 2.5 times. So when we're thinking about the category, it's going to be very hard to attract lots of new shoppers and lots of new eaters. Now, if we just think about the sort of the retail landscape within potatoes, you've got obviously 3 main sections, the sort of the old or main crop potato, your new, and then your baking potatoes. And if we look at their spend shares, we can see, so the old main crop, they tend to be, that's the largest sector, followed by new and baking. And then we think about, well, actually, their volume contribution. So, unsurprisingly, the main crop is the largest section. But if we think about how their volume has grown or declined in the last year, actually, what you've seen is significant growth in main crop, but actually the other 2 sectors declining. So the encouraging thing here is, yes, if you can turn it around in your biggest sector, we can absolutely do it in some of the smaller sectors too. And I think, harking back to that point I made about being a sort of lazy historian, if we look at what potato volumes have been doing for the last few years, it has been a really difficult landscape. We've got to remember, actually, potatoes have now returned to growth, and that's driven by what's going on in the main crop. And one of the things that we talk about is how cheap potatoes are now compared to how they have been for the last couple of years. So I've just got here the rolling average price that's paid for potatoes by consumers. And the thing that's really interesting is, obviously, we know about prices going up in 2013 and 14. But the thing that's really encouraging, I think, and lots of people ignore, is actually potato prices are 15% higher now at retail than they were in 2012. So yes, we had the shortage, we had prices going up, but actually that's quite impressive price inflation on 3 years. And that's, I think, something that's quite often missed within the potato industry. So we've got this massive category, and it's bought an awful lot. So I think it's going to be really hard to just get more people in. So actually it's about thinking, well, what can we do? And that's where it's about getting into an extra basket. So a subtle change, but also getting onto an extra plate. So what I've done is I've looked at our panellists, and I've looked at, right, not everyone's equal in terms of how often they engage with potatoes. It's got the average frequency is 26. And I've plotted each of those panellists and what percent they are onto how often they buy the potato category. So what we've got some people who are sort of real sort of die-hard potato fanatics, buying it over 35 times a year. And then we've actually got 4% of potato buyers who will only buy it once a year. So you've got a real range. So if we just said blanket, let's just get everyone to buy once more, that would be worth about £42 million to go after. But we need to think a bit more sort of in a targeted way. So if we just think about this group, so these are the ones who buy it more than once a quarter, but not quite once a month. So they've got some engagement with potatoes, and they're not just buying it for Christmas dinners, for example. They're buying it a bit more regularly, but they're not sort of fanatics. Get that group to buy it, that's £12.5 million to go after. And what's quite nice about this group is they're quite easy to sum up. So I was having a look at who these shoppers were, and I was talking to one of my housemates who also works at Kantar. And they're London-based. That's where you're going to find this group. They were born after 1980, and they tend to shop in Waitrose and Sainsbury's, but you will find them in a Lidl. And I was sort of thinking, right, how on earth do I bring this to life? My housemate just said it's you. And I thought, right, okay. Well, that's great, but I haven't got £12.5 million to spend. And he said, but there's one difference. They read The Guardian, so if you're going to, that's sort of one point of difference. But the great thing is, so I might not have £12.5 million, but there's 8.5 million of these people. And if you're asking them to spend £1.25, I think absolutely. There are lots of small purchases that can happen, and that's where that £12.5 million is going to come from. So it's about, can we get into that extra basket, but not a blanket approach? And then it's about this extra plate. So it might not surprise you that potatoes, the single biggest dish for potatoes is the roast. It represents about 1 billion potato occasions. And that's followed by things like pies and pasties. And then we've got a sort of strong sausage link with sausage and mash, and then casseroles. But one that's really doing well is your association with fish, so particularly oily fishes. And that's really riding a health trend. And if we look at, well, which are the dishes that are growing their potato consumption, it's around pies and pasties, but it's around casseroles and that sort of one-pot cooking. But actually, those oily fishes, that's where we're seeing a lot of growth coming from. Now, it's one thing to think, okay, not everyone shops the same, but obviously not everyone eats the same. So if we're thinking at a total produce level, how big are different consumer groups? So if we go for the single biggest group of people that eat produce, it's women aged over 65. And what we can see is they're grey. What that denotes them is they're not really changing their produce consumption much in the last year. But if we plot some of the other ages, so their counterparts, the males, so a bit smaller in terms of how many occasions they represent, also not really changing their habits. This is at total produce level. What we can see is actually there are pockets of people that are growing their consumption, so children, women once they get sort of over 45, but actually females that are 10 years younger, declining the amount of produce that they eat. But then we think, okay, well, what about in potatoes, so total potatoes? Have we got some key target areas? Well, unsurprisingly, yes, there are some people that aren't consuming potatoes as much. But the thing that's really encouraging, so when I mentioned about earlier that we're seeing growth in the biggest sector, and we look at just sort of the old main crop potatoes, where the growth is coming from on occasions, everyone, that's resonated with people across age and gender spectrums, so from children eating more to adults eating more. So actually, yes, it is a message that absolutely can resonate with lots of different demographics. So to conclude my presentation, for me, it's about these subtle changes. So it's about targeting that extra basket because, yes, it absolutely can win. But also it's about targeting that tummy as well and thinking about that end occasion. And that's what I'm going to hand over. And we're going to now hear about the AHDB's campaign on more than just a bit on the side. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was an excellent presentation. I'm hoping everybody's thinking of questions, because I'm sure there's many, many questions from that. But please hold them till after Arthur's presentation. So, Arthur?
Right. Well, as Zoe's introduced, as you can tell, I'm not Rebecca. I'm Arthur, but you can call me Becca if you like. So we're going to build on what Chris has already begun with. We're going to be looking at what the consumer outlook looks like and how that's really affected the potato market. So the presentation in brief, we're going to be looking at the recent changes to shopper sentiment. So similar to what Chris has said, looking at how sort of coming out of recession and how shoppers are now making decisions and changing their shopping habits. And really what that's doing to their focus and their expectations. What are they expecting from a shop and what are they focusing on when they're making decisions? And then most importantly, how are potatoes adapting to these trends? So we're going to bring in some more potatoes case studies and just having a look at where we think it's taking advantage of these changes in shopping habits. So to begin with shopper sentiment, alongside growing economic growth, we're starting to see real growth in earnings now. Wages are rising faster than inflation for the last few months, and that's impacting on consumer confidence. So as you might expect, consumers feel like they've got a bit more in their pockets, feel like they're a bit more comfortable about spending, a bit more upbeat about economic prospects. And then that's all having an effect on what are they focusing on when they're shopping. So coming back to one of Chris's slides, looking at how many consumers are focusing on cost, we are seeing that focus on cost decline slightly. It doesn't mean it's not important, but there's lots of other factors in there that people are considering when they're making their shopping decisions. So, for example, picking out three of them here, alongside the cost, there's a lot of focus now on the quality, the health, and the convenience aspects. And they're three examples we're going to look at and how that's impacting potato purchasing decisions and where potatoes might be able to take advantage of or adapt to those trends. So looking here, the focus on quality has risen. So this one is looking at what people are saying that their single main factor when they're shopping is. And clearly, the total spend is still the single most important factor. We are seeing a distinctive rise in people saying, actually, quality is the single most important factor. And I think it's about the balance between these two. And this is what we do with this showing the scales here. It's about balancing quality and price. Consumers don't just want to save the most prices or get the best quality, but they want both. And that really comes to this idea of value, which is what I'm going to come back to a few times. And it's about, the concept of it's about getting good quality at a good price, which really gives you the value of product you want. So if we look at Aldi and Lidl, for example, Chris has we've had a look a lot about how they've grown recently in the last few years in the grocery market. But it's interesting to look at the way they're signposting to consumers and the way their adverts are focusing. So traditionally, we might think of them as being low cost, growing the market through being the lowest prices. But there's a lot of signposting to do with the quality of products. So we see a lot of, say, Aldi doing a lot on their wines to show how good quality they are, for example. And we look at a lot of their adverts. It's about how they can actually match the quality of other brands while still maintaining that competitive price point. And that's where this idea of value comes in. Looking at health, we've seen as a reason for choosing what you're eating, people again are saying that that's becoming more important. So how do potatoes fit into that? Well, clearly it's a bit of a mixed bag. From what people tell us, you've got your boiled potatoes, your baked potatoes are perceived as very healthy. Then your fried and your chips, people say, no, they don't perceive it as healthy. I don't think there's anything particularly unexpected there. But clearly that shows there's a sort of a mixed bag within the potato categories. And then compared to the other carbohydrates, rice is still the big competitor for what people perceive as perhaps the most healthy. And then finally, convenience. This isn't a new trend. It's something that we know people have been focused on for a long time. But I think it's important to notice that the trend is continuing. People are still expecting more and more convenience from their products. And this isn't just about what they're buying, but how they're buying it. So, for example, you've now got people using the contactless payments. So it's part of a whole behavioural trend. It's not just about the products themselves. It's about how they want to buy it, how they want to make it, how they want to use it. So I think with convenience, it's important not just to look at it as a single thing, but there's actually multiple aspects to convenience, and all of these we can take advantage of. So if we're saying convenience is key, the first one, which is perhaps the one you'd imagine at first, is the speed of making it. So a ready-baked baked potato saves a lot of time. You're not spending 2 hours in the oven. You put it in for 5 minutes or 6 minutes and warm it up. And similarly, French fries, quick cook, they're 5 minutes and they're ready. And we know that people are focused on that. And as the economic prospects are improving, people are starting to choose things based on convenience as well as just price. We are seeing a lot of new product development in this category. And we know that people are prepared to spend more to save time. And then the next aspect of convenience, it's about flavour. So here we use, for example, Caribbean wedges. It's about offering consumers a product that gives them flavours ready-made. It's not, even if it's not saving, compared to plain wedges, for example, it might not save any cooking time, but it's saving the decision time of thinking about what do I want to put this with or how do I want to prepare this product. And so it's not just about the actual cooking speed, but it's about the convenience of the entire decision-making process. And again, we see people do seem to be prepared to spend more for taste. People will buy these products even if they cost perhaps a little bit more, if it's offering them this value. And then finally, solutions. So this is talking about, for example, ready meals or meal deals or packages, or perhaps a big one would be a lunchtime meal solution. It's about offering an entire meal. It sort of brings in the speed factor and the flavour factor and just the idea of taking a lot of decisions out of people's hands. But it offers someone an entire meal solution. Perhaps it would be something they wouldn't think of making themselves. So actually it allows people to easily extend their repertoire of meals without having to necessarily find out, research how to make it, to then go through the process of cooking it and a bit of trial and error. It's a whole solution in one to get perhaps a new flavour or a new dish on the menu. And I think bringing that in with the other aspects of increasing quality and increasing health, if it's about bringing all these together. So we see a lot of new products, for example, on the market that offer these solutions, but are also perceived as healthy and as good quality food. So whereas historically we might think of ready meals as, you might think of a few years ago ready meals as quite sort of low-end, relatively basic food. I think there is a lot of newer things coming in this category that are perceived as healthy, are perceived as good quality. And we see there people are definitely prepared to spend more compared to the cost of the ingredients themselves on buying these. And it's really bringing all of these together that I think is this concept of value. If it can offer value for the spend and offer convenience and offer health and offer good quality, that's what people are looking for, rather than just the cost itself. And here it's just an example really to make back up that final point. So we've got Jamie's 30-minute meals and Jamie's 15-minute meals both come out relatively recently. The 30-minute meals came out a few years ago. It was advertised a lot on the good food fast, so it's focusing on that speed aspect, the convenience, whereas the more recent one, as well as obviously seeing the convenience time has moved down again, is also focusing on the nutritious aspect, the health, as well as offering a convenient product. And I think going back to the idea of speed, it's not necessarily that potatoes become any harder to produce, but people's goalposts are continuing to move, and that's what it's moving. That's what it's challenging us. Anyway, so in summary, looking at shopper sentiment, it is improving, and as it's improving, we are seeing new trends developing. We're seeing new products come on the market, and as people are looking at more than just the cost aspects, there's more opportunities there to produce products that offer consumers what they're looking for. So that's changing their focus, their expectations, their quality and health are growing. And then it's about how can potatoes adapt to that, and how can the category balance the value for time versus value for money, offer quality whilst also offering convenience and a good value product. So that's the end of my presentation, and I think we'll both go on to the questions shortly.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Arthur. It's an excellent presentation. Well, I found both those presentations quite uplifting and looking at opportunities in our market, so a great way to start on a Thursday morning. Questions. We have some roving mics. Do I have any questions in the audience? Yes, I do. I have one just there. Here's the mic coming. So, Hugh.
That was really fascinating and quite inspiring. If you could imagine I was a 30-year-old potato grower with fire in my belly, there's a huge amount of information you've just given us there. Could you just direct me to one area that you think I should concentrate on in terms of growing my business over the next 10 years?
For me, it's stop talking as a grower and talk in a consumer-focused way. That's how you're going to make potatoes, same with any market, resonate with your audience. So you can talk at them about the technical specification of a potato, and you might think it's a finer tasting product, but if the shopper doesn't notice the difference, you're talking to them about something that actually doesn't resonate with them. So I would be thinking, getting into your shopper mindset, because as well as being that 30-year-old grower, you're a 30-year-old shopper as well, and thinking about what are the things that engage you, what are the things that engage your friends, your family, your peers into buying things. And because it's not just being shouted at by this product, it's about, well, why would I, and understanding that. And that's where I'd be sort of pushing to market my product and pushing to work with retailers that want to support me with that kind of messaging.
Arthur, do you have anything to add?
I'd really just agree with that. It's about knowing what the consumers want and about producing products that can meet that, and about working with the supply chain, I think, to match that demand at every level.
Thank you. Very interesting question. I have a gentleman just in the middle.
Archie Gibson, Agrico. Thanks very much for the presentation. Simon, good to pick up on your presentation this time around. I was with IPL with you sometime earlier in the summer. My question relates to multimedia and engaging with the demographics where we want to try and get them to do, let's say, one extra purchase to try and get the growth. At the moment, we're seeing grain crop growth in the main crop area, so that's now in a pre-packed format. Loose, we've seen decline. Is there more we should be trying to do as an industry to get the message to consumers at shelf talker, point of sale area, maybe using QR codes, helping demysticize the category? And I noticed that your presentation didn't give any views on that, and I'd like to ask you to give us some thoughts, please. Thank you.
There's quite an interesting sort of several looks across different categories, the number of battles you face. So you've got the battle of sort of communicating that person to get them to the fixture, and it's that battle at fixture. And it's not just a case of marketing, but you need to support it, as you say, in store, so whether it's shelf talkers, but it's also a simplified range. I think what Aldi have shown is if you get a really simple range, you can still encourage shopping around. So equally within potatoes, I don't think then being confronted as a shopper with hundreds of different varieties or dozens of varieties, that's not making my shopping experience easier, unless I understand truly what's the benefit of each variety, because practically I'm not going to have 3 or 4 varieties of potato in my cupboard thinking that this will be the best for boiling, this will be the best for mashing, this is the best for roasting. I'm looking for an all-purpose or simplified offering, but that's me. But there are people that will be looking at it, so families will be looking for it. But I think there's a great case study a few years ago. Do you remember the wrapping farmers from Yo Valley? So they did this phenomenal marketing campaign where they took out advertising space during the X Factor, and they had this great TV advert, but they supported it with promotions as well in store, saw their volumes fly. Year after, they repeated the marketing, but they didn't do the promotions in store. Actually, volume fell away, and that's because, yes, you've successfully driven the person to the in-store, but what you haven't then done is remembered that there's still that battle to get into that basket. And that's where you need to effectively tie the two together. Otherwise, what happened there was their competitors, so whether that be Uncle Ben's with their rice pouches or someone with their couscous and grains offerings, sort of quick cook, that's where they're going to win spend from the hard work you've done driving people to that fixture.
Excellent. Looks like I have 2 more questions. One at the back. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Dieter Lloyd. I'm from a marketing and PR agency. The pink lady images you showed are shot in my kitchen. You've touched there on Yo Valley and the apple top fruit category, but you've picked on brands. Given the rationalisation at retail of ranges and the simplification of ranges, which you talked about in the discounters, what room is there in the potato fixture for branding? We've seen success from Rooster and 1 or 2 others. What's your view on that?
Well, as a shopper, brands are brilliant because you know what you're getting. That's the perception. I think what's quite tricky for a shopper is, so Sainsbury's are my main store that I shop in, and I know that. And I wasn't too aware of this until I started working produce. So I religiously, the only potatoes I bought were Vivaldi potatoes. Whenever I bought them, that was what I bought. So then you go to another store and you try and find it, and then you ask someone in store, well, what can I buy that's equally, and there's sort of a lack of knowledge there about, well, what could replace it. I think having that multi-retailer offering through, so whether it's a Bartlett Rooster, whether it's now Greenvale going into other retailers, having that same taste but elsewhere is a great offering for a retailer. I guess also it helps diversify the risk as a supplier, but it does mean that you can do marketing around it, because people, if they understand that taste delivery that they're going to get, will pay extra. So I think, as Arthur showed, that premium for understanding those needs, there's lots of money to go after there, and shoppers will pay more because there are so many other categories that you can point to within grocery where shoppers are doing exactly that. What you need to do is remove from the mindset of thinking, well, potatoes are just a potato and there's something more exciting. Otherwise, you almost go the way of the banana, which has gone from being a really exciting tropical fruit to now being 68p a kilo in any retailer that you buy it. And it's lost that buzz, it's lost that excitement. And now the volumes are falling away, it's losing cash as well. Yeah.
Can I come back on that?
Yeah?
Is that okay?
Yes, we have a couple of minutes. Yes, come on.
So you've got a category there where people are used to buying by name variety or by function. In bananas is not a relevant comparison, because bananas, there's one variety, it's Cavendish. Nothing else survives. So in terms of differentiation, it doesn't matter whether it's fair trade or own label or branded. Chiquita, to all intents and purposes, Fifes don't really exist as brands in the UK because they're still selling Cavendish, not potatoes, bananas. So one of the things that we did with Pink Lady in Top Fruit is because people are used to buying by named variety. They buy Granny Smith, Golden Delicious, because they have specific product attributes. in potatoes, the AHDB have done a lot of work around function, but it's interesting to hear you talk about a named variety, where that named variety has certain attributes that you like. And my wife likes, for example, Greenvale Farm Fresh potatoes. So what I'm interested in is the AHDB campaign to look at function the wrong way to go, and therefore it should be about function and named variety?
The reason that I spoke about variety was because of I thought of my understanding of the angle of the question around the branding and that sort of unique messaging. The function absolutely is imperative, because what you find is, I mean, if you just look at the prepared potatoes, for example, the prepared potatoes side of the market, there is a clear difference between the performance of those that sit in the produce fixture and those that sit in the ready meal fixture. The ones sitting in the ready meal fixture are doing much better, and that's because they're offering that solution. So when Arthur was talking about people pay more for a solution, yes, they will, and it's a booming category because people aren't just thinking, it takes it away from being more of an automatic purchase. It's something a bit more treaty, it's a bit more special, and that's where you definitely see growth. So I think absolutely targeting occasions is absolutely the way to go. And then it's just recognising that there will still be that largely commoditized, or people will still make lots of automatic purchases, but you can win lots of extra purchases through targeting extra occasions, such as the midweek or the midweek meal. So things like the midweek roast that AHDB did on the meat side of things.
Excellent discussion, and hopefully you'll be visiting the marketing team to discuss it more later. I think there was one more question. We've got time for one last quick question, and I think this will have to be the last question.
Reporter from World Potato Markets. You focused on the fresh, but on processing, are you seeing a sort of a plateauing of demand for processing? I see that in the States. There seems to be that actually fresh is what people are looking for, and different solutions in fresh, and processing seems to have plateaued a bit in the States. Is that the same in the UK?
At top line levels, so I think on the frozen side, potato products are struggling, driven by some of the larger sectors. So we've got things, even the jacket potatoes coming down year on year, but also chips. If you look at the chilled process side of things, what we see actually is that's really strong growth. So I think it was up about 9% if it's just within the produce fixture, and it's up about 14 or 15%, but I can double check this, please don't quote me on that. It's growing even faster on the ready meal side of it, where they're in there. So I think, but it's still much smaller categories. So I think where we've got 1.1 billion for the fresh potato side, the number for frozen escapes me, but the chilled prepared is about $250 million. So still a relative infancy, but seeing strong growth. So I don't think it's plateaued in that respect, because I think it's still new to many people.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm being told that we've got time for one last question. Is there one last question? No? I think we've had some excellent discussion, and I would like to thank Chris and Arthur very, very much, because, as I said, very uplifting presentations, and that's a really great way to start a major event like BP 2015. And I'd like to thank you as the audience, and some excellent questions there. Please continue to ask these questions of the team, of the AHDB team here, who are here for the 2 days. Chris has very kindly said he will be on stand for this morning. I think he has to leave this afternoon, but if you want to particularly go and talk to Chris, he'll be here, and Arthur as well. So thank you very, very much. Our next seminar starts at 12:30, so if you're not staying, we'd ask you to sort of leave and come back later for another seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.